So today, we're diving into the incredible journey of a neuroscientist, a woman of pure data and reason. After a devastating loss completely upended her world, she was forced to question everything she thought she knew about reality, consciousness, and what might happen after we die.
Okay, we're actually going to start at the end here, because the conclusion is, well, it's pretty staggering. That's a direct quote from Dr. Tara Swart, who's a medical doctor and a psychiatrist. So the question is, how on earth does a scientist with her background make a statement that seems to fly in the face of her entire field? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning.
Before any of the unexplainable signs, before all the deep research, there was a personal tragedy. And that tragedy was the catalyst for absolutely everything that followed.
First, you really have to get who Dr. Swart is. Her whole career was built on scientific rigor, on hard facts. As a psychiatrist, she was the one diagnosing people based on their perception of reality. Sometimes, she was part of teams that hospitalized people for having the exact kinds of experiences she was about to have herself. I mean, just think about that for a second. In 2021, her husband Robin passed away from leukemia, and her world just fell apart. She describes it as this moment where everything she believed in went completely wrong, leaving her totally and utterly broken. And this timeline, it just shows you how raw and immediate that grief really was.
And it's in the depths of that grief that things started to happen. Stuff her scientific training had absolutely no box for. Things that felt deeply personal and deeply strange.
You know, at first it was subtle. Robin's, her late husband's namesake, just started showing up everywhere. But then it escalated. She'd wake up shivering from this profound, bone-deep cold that she later connected to the morgue where his body was held. But the big one, the one that really changed things, a massive thump on her shoulder that woke her from a dead sleep, only to see this hazy, dissolving image of her husband standing right by her bed.
This is just incredible, right? Her first reaction wasn't, oh, it's a sign. It was pure self-diagnosis. She literally turned her own psychiatric training on herself, questioning her own sanity and recognizing that what she was experiencing was uncomfortably close to the symptoms of psychosis she'd seen in her own patients.
But here's where the story takes a turn. Instead of just writing this all off as grief-induced hallucinations, she did what a true scientist does. She started to investigate. She began digging, searching for any scientific models that could possibly explain what was happening to her without simply dismissing it.
So she started with a really basic question. How many senses do we actually have? We all learn 5 in school, right? Sight, sound, touch. Well, it turns out a review of the science shows we have at least 34, and a lot of them are non-conscious, like sensing the pH of our blood. And right away, that just blows the doors open. It suggests we're perceiving way more of reality than we're consciously aware of.
Her search then led her to this really fascinating field called neuroaesthetics and this specific model. It looks at the weird overlap in the brain between super creative people and those with certain mental illnesses. And this got her thinking, what if this extreme grief, which can feel like a kind of temporary psychosis, could also be a doorway to a more creative, expanded state of awareness? Okay, so this is the key insight. Think of these 3 traits. First, your brain starts connecting things that seem totally unrelated. Second, you get really good at noticing new stuff. And third, your mental filter kind of gets loosened up, letting more information in. Now, for one person, that combination could lead to a psychological crisis. But for someone else, maybe those are the exact tools you need to intentionally open your mind and see reality in a brand new way.
So her search started to expand outward, from the inner workings of her own brain to these bizarre phenomena that happen right on the very edge of life and death. You know, the areas that science still has a really hard time explaining.
She really zeroed in on 2 big mysteries. First, something called terminal lucidity. This is when someone with severe brain damage, like from Alzheimer's, suddenly becomes crystal clear, totally coherent, just hours before they die. How is that even possible? And second, near-death experiences, or NDEs, reported by countless people who've been clinically dead and then brought back. And there's this one NDE case, documented by a psychiatry professor, Dr. Bruce Grayson, that is just mind-blowing. A patient is in cardiac arrest, clinically dead, and he claims he saw his favorite nurse, who gave him this really specific, kind of strange message to pass along.
So the patient gets revived. He relays the message. And here's the kicker, the impossible part. His nurse? She had been killed in a car accident that very weekend, in the new red MG she'd just bought. There's absolutely positively no conventional way he could have known that.
So you take all of this together.
Her personal signs, the neuroscience of perception, the wild evidence from NDEs, and it led Dr. Swart to a completely new way of thinking about the mind, the brain, and reality itself.
Okay, but the big scientific pushback, the obvious one, is confirmation bias, right? The idea that we just see what we're looking for. You're grieving for someone named Robin, so suddenly you start noticing Robins everywhere. How does Dr. Swart account for that?
Well, she points to the actual brain machinery behind it, the reticular activating system, or RAS. The best way to think of it is like your brain's personal bouncer. It stands at the door of your consciousness and decides what information gets in and what gets ignored. It's the reason you can hear your name whispered across a loud, crowded room.
And this is her big paradigm shift. She doesn't deny this filtering process. Instead, she says, use it. Use it to your advantage. Instead of being a passive victim of your brain's filter, what if we could consciously direct it? What if we could tune it to a different frequency and practice the art of noticing what we would otherwise miss?
After looking at all the evidence, especially those cases of terminal lucidity, where a physically destroyed brain suddenly works perfectly, she came to this one single, radical conclusion. For any of these things to be possible, our mind, our consciousness, it can't just be a byproduct of the physical stuff in our heads.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to chew on. What if these phenomena we glimpse on the border of life and death? What if they aren't weird exceptions to the rule? Maybe they're actually revealing a fundamental truth that's there all the time, that our mind and our brain can operate independently, and we're just not trained to see it in our day-to-day lives.